One of the things that I think is time to do, because sadly time is running out, is giving a proper tour of this entire space from start to finish and telling a little bit about the story of how it came to be. Right now we're going through an intensely difficult time. For the last 3 years, we have been modifying this space, growing into it, stabilizing it, quieting it, tucking it back away behind these walls, including our employees tucking their cars behind a line of trees, trying to make it so that we don't have a big footprint on our community, trying to make it so that we can continue to utilize this space that we have literally built with our bare hands, with the hands of my dad, who's been here for 2 winters doing construction. And so we started having some problems with the city because of a complaining neighbor about a year ago. We mitigated and mitigated and mitigated, and you know what? Let me just show you. So follow me. This entire building that you're looking at was not here this time last year. In fact, it wasn't here this time in December of last year. We constructed this entire thing from late December through late February. It's about a 750 square foot addition that we put in. We designed it like an RV garage because we have not had the wool over our eyes. We have known that at some point we might have to abandon this place and leave. There's a lot of trauma associated with that idea, and I hope that in conveying the story of the last 3 years, you'll understand why. So before this existed, this was just driveway all the way back, and the garage was a side-loaded garage, and it was just a 2-car garage. And that was the original bakery in that 2-car garage. Of course, our employees parked on the street. So a little over a year ago, when we started having trouble with a neighbor, the complaint was that we had a delivery truck parked here in the driveway. It actually stood right here. And we had 3 or 4 cars in the street pretty much at all times, because that's about how many people we have over at a time. And so if you see our street, it's pretty quiet. There's not a whole lot of cars. And we had 3 or 4, which doesn't seem, it's not illegal to park on the street. We certainly didn't think anything of it at first, but people, one person had a problem with it. So we responded. As we were building this building, we responded by adding this parking for employees. And my theory was, well, by doing this, I'm removing all the cars off the street, and I'm also removing any view of what's going on in here. And so I thought, any reasonable human at that point would just leave us alone. We don't make noise. Even when our mixer and our slicer are running, there is no more noise than you hear right now. In fact, we have 2 vehicles parked in here. There is never any more commotion around here than adding another vehicle. I want to sort of start in the beginning and take you back to 2017. We were customers of Proof Bread. Proof was a one-man operation, one guy. It was in another garage in the same city. And we went to a market one day, Amanda and I, to get our Proof Bread. The lady who sold back then, she knew us because we showed up every week, and we bought the giant loaves. You've probably seen them on our feed if you follow us. Emerald makes these beautiful, intricate designs. Recently, she did all kinds of craziness. She did all the characters in Super Mario. She did all the Mario characters, caricatures on loaves. We typically only make a handful of these giant 4-pound loaves every week because typically people don't want that much bread at once. But the people that do love them, and I was one of those crazies that bought the giant loaf. So of course we were sort of known because of that. You remember the customer that gets the giant loaf of bread. And so I walked up to the booth that one day, and Karen, the lady who was selling for Jared, just looked at me and said, "He's moving." I said, "What? Who's moving? What's going on?" And it turned out that Jared, the original owner of Proof, was moving in just 3 short weeks. So I made a phone call. 2 days later, I hopped in my car and I took a drive. I met with a man, and I came home asking my wife if we could take over a bakery. When you make those sort of life-altering decisions, the ones where everything about your life is about to shift course, you can't always calculate everything. You can't foresee everything that's about to happen. You certainly don't have the ability to picture the entire horizon when you're about to change just about everything. So gut instinct comes into play a lot. And so where that started, we had that conversation, and literally 2 days after, I was showing up at 4 a.m. to learn how to make bread. It was June of 2017, so the temperature out here was 110, 120 each day. And I would show up, work in a really hot garage, and prepare for the inevitability of moving an entire bakery just 2 weeks later into this space. And this space was just a residential garage. It had no extra power. It had a few outlets, for, I don't know, whatever it is that you plug into a garage, like maybe an electric drill that runs a few amps, certainly not commercial ovens. Jared at the time owned a pizza oven and a convection oven, and I had to figure out how to plug those suckers in. And I'll add that we didn't own the house yet. So we were renting, and we were interested in buying this house. We had an inkling of a feeling that the owner would sell it to us, but that was not something that had been negotiated yet. And I had to take this crazy gamble. Will I actually own this house? Am I willing to take a risk adding new power to the garage? Hopefully the owner won't be too mad. I better do a good enough job so that, even if it doesn't work out and we don't buy the house, hopefully he just wins with a little bit more power availability in his garage and it doesn't harm anything. So I went to Home Depot and I rented a trencher. And right at the edge of where this sidewalk is, now there's a sidewalk. There's no sidewalk here. This was all just rock. I trenched a line all the way down from my electrical box at the edge of the house that runs this line, turns this corner, and goes into the bakery right here. This is the first power that we added to the bakery. It was 100 amps. Just enough to power those ovens. And I had a neighbor who is an electrician come by and do the actual electrical hookup. Said, you can barely squeeze enough power. You're sort of borrowing from what you have, but that's okay because your house doesn't use all of those amperages around the house that it's rated for. So you can do this. And that was me. The best part of that story was the day that I had to get the electrical conduit underneath the sidewalk. And that's where this budget electrician that was doing me a big favor, because keep in mind we had no cash flow at the time. We were working our day jobs, which paid us enough money to support ourselves, not invest in a brand new business. So his help sort of ended at the easy stuff. Laying down the piping, hooking it all up, the stuff that he knows to do. He said getting the trenching done would be extra, and he was not going to touch getting it underneath the sidewalk. So I worked an entire long day with Jared, barely got any sleep, came over here with a sledgehammer in 120 degrees late in the evening when it's the hottest, when that island heat effect that happens here in Phoenix in the summer keeps the temperatures high. So 6 p.m. I'm here and I am just sledgehammering away, just like that. At that time in my life, I hadn't been seasoned to torture myself with physical labor every day. I'd gotten a little used to the conceptualizing in my previous business, the project management, the software development that requires computer work and sitting. And so the idea of waking up at 4 in the morning, going and baking for the entire morning, then doing deliveries, coming back completely exhausted at 1 in the afternoon, then I had to check on my day job that I was still doing. I had to answer emails, I had to get on calls. I probably had to go clean up some mystery shops around town. I owned a video mystery shopping company. And so I went out and did some shops, came back home, it's 5 or 6 o'clock, and I knew that if I didn't get this pipe in the ground, that we were not able to move the bakery in just 2 short weeks. So I was here 120 degrees, just hammering away until I finally broke through to that side. And that was how we got power in the bakery. Feel free to go back in my Instagram. You can find us at Proof Bread on Instagram. And you can go back through to a photo history that predates our history with Proof. The Instagram account that we took over goes all the way back to 2014. So if you want to see the organic growth of the bakery over a 6-year period, it's all there. All from the Jared days, all the way through our journey. You can see that video of me sledgehammering a pipe to get the electrical in here, and you can see what this place looked like. But we had a few outlets, we had nothing else. The entry to the house was right here, so we lost this entire wall. This wall was not useful to us because smack in the middle of it was the entry to the house. Through this opening right here was our backyard. So this was an exterior wall. And then one of the things that made this garage particularly difficult to work with was there was a landing, a step 3 inches up that was poured all around the perimeter. So where you see this break in the concrete, that was uneven ground. Now that sounds like no big deal, whatever, but when you have things on wheels, all of a sudden everything on wheels, you get to the edge, and what do? If you tilt up enough to go over the edge, and this thing is loaded with product, that's a no-go. So you can no longer really use that space. It's like that square footage just got eliminated. Of course, we didn't have any equipment at the time, so this was the last of our worries. We hand mixed everything. You're gonna have to look through photos to find the history of this, but you will see photos of Amanda and I mixing large batches of dough in this big homemade trough that Jared had constructed. We'd mix 40 loaves of bread just by hand in that. This space had no water hookup. It had hardly any power. And so there was a water heater in the back corner with the source water coming in, the source cold water coming in over there. So I pretty much immediately threw up water lines all over the ceiling. Just went to Home Depot, and fortunately my next door neighbor at the time was a plumber. I didn't know as much as I do now. I've really done a lot of construction over the last few years myself, so I picked up a lot. That project would have been easy for me now, but 3 years ago, the idea of running copper lines myself was difficult. Again, I was running another business, I was working full-time learning to bake, and I was constructing the bare bones of this space all at once. So we had lines running all over the place. We had put the original 2-compartment sink here. It was a 10-foot sink, and it literally took up that whole landing. Also, I didn't know where to drain it. A drain line for a sink is super important. You literally cannot live without a sink drain. So what that you bring a sink in? Jared owned a sink, but I didn't have a drain. And the way that this house is constructed, there was no drainage on this side of the house at all, because there's no bathrooms on this side of the house. The only thing close to it was our kitchen sink, which is pretty far away from here, several walls away, and it goes out front and drains out. The worst part is this house was constructed in the 80s, so we didn't know where to meet that drain out front. It wasn't like, oh, the drain's right there. Typically in newer houses, there's something called a clean out. It's a little circular thing that sticks out of the ground right above your drain line so that if your drain gets clogged, you have access to it and you can free it up. Older homes don't have this. So before it was part of building code, it just didn't get included. So one of our big problems up front is we had a sink and nowhere to drain it. So we put in a blue pipe and we made sure all we were washing was water. And so we would use Dawn soap, which was biodegradable, water, and that was going in our backyard. I'm sad to say. There's nowhere else. That's how we rinsed our stuff. You gotta start somewhere. Before we did the blue pipe, we actually for a few weeks had like bins that we put under the sinks that we could wash our dishes. The drainage would go into these bins and we would literally carry these bins into our house sink and drain them down the drain there. It was nuts, just absolutely nuts. That blue pipe would get clogged up once in a while, and so we literally, some of the first crew members we had, once in a while we had to go and like jump on it to get the stuff to continue to drain. It was gross, it was awful. We then had to like go in our yard and like dilute the drainage so that it would just go into the earth. We were confident that we were helping the soil. However, it was not a good situation at all. And yet we were working like 20-hour days. So there was really no time, money, or resource to fix this problem. Because believe it or not, when you are working 20-hour days on your feet, there is not a whole lot of gas left in the tank. Especially when you're learning something brand new. We had to hit the ground running. 7 days of delivery of bread a week, yet not enough money to support a single household. The gross revenues for Proof were under 80,000 at the time, and that might sound like a lot of money to people, but that's before all expenses. And keep in mind, you have to pay for the ingredients alone. That's gonna cut a huge chunk of that. You have to pay for the utilities. You have to pay for the transport. You have to pay for the difference in price that it takes to sell your goods, meaning if you have anyone selling for you, you have to pay them. You have to pay market fees. So that $80,000 starts dwindling down below the poverty line really, really, really quickly. Don't think that if you are in a food business bringing in that kind of money per year that you are going to be comfortable. In fact, you will make probably more money as a minimum wage worker than in that setup. I came in here in the morning all on my own. The whole household was sleeping. I was rolling my eyes and wondering what the heck is happening with my life. It was exhilarating because I had never done anything like this before. But you know, my morning started with just basically dumping flour into the big trough, dumping water over it, putting the starter in, putting the salt in, and just getting my hands in the dough and mixing. And I was also doing software development. My developers were overseas, and so they worked overnight. So I would be getting pinged on Skype from a software developer. Meanwhile, I started quickly realizing there's a problem here because my hands were covered in dough. And my day job was essentially being a support by that point, like helping people do their jobs, helping the developers get along with their day, helping my people out in the field doing the actual mystery shopping along with their day. It's really hard to answer a phone when your hands are caked in dough. Now, meanwhile, I was on my own and we were doing everything ambiently, so we had all the processes running. You weren't just mixing. By the end of the shift, you were baking, you were scaling, you were doing multiple things. You were trying to package, you were trying to load things in your car. And so it was nutty. I was like running around oven timers with my hands caked in dough. So the oven timer goes off and you gotta run to the sink and you gotta, oh, by the way, I didn't have such luxury as a sprayer like this. It was the old school, just this with no drain. And so it was just nuts. The sink didn't actually exist here. Like I said, it was on that wall. And basically we built this table ourselves. This is an IKEA countertop. And I put together the legs through, wood that I bought at Home Depot. The first iteration was not this stable. I didn't make any drawings. I just thought about what a table should look like and put it together. There were some design flaws where when you moved the table, the whole thing shook because of the way that I braced the legs to the actual tabletop. Something like a year and a half later, over winter break, again, you can go back through my Instagram feed and probably see some photo on this. I'm sure I documented it. I completely redid the legs and the support for the table. And so little by little, this place has transformed. We didn't really buy any equipment at first. We were trying to just make sure that our sink wasn't draining into our backyard, and we were trying to make sure that things would work out for us. We did start religiously looking at auction sites and picking up one piece here, one piece there. It was all piece of crap type stuff that had been worked in 3 or 4 different facilities before. One of the first things we did was pick up a second bread slicer because the one that we had was so badly broken. It was missing a blade, and we suspected that it needed a whole board replacement, which cost over $1,000. So we actually picked up a slicer for like $200. It was not a good slicer, but nonetheless, it got us through some time. And we just started trying to make our life a little easier with equipment. We bought a trailer for about $2,500 to haul bread to and from the market. You can go back to 2017 and see us loading that trailer for the first time. It was good times. And you kind of roll the tape forward. We started hiring our first crew members. Our first crew members joined this crazy medieval baking. So our crew members today, frankly, live a life of luxury in comparison, or at least more of a normal baking life. They come in. At least part of our space is air conditioned. This was not air conditioned. Yeah, right. There was a garage door, a whole 9 yards. You look at the ceiling, it's beautifully lit right now. That was not the case 3 years ago. There was one fluorescent light here and another fluorescent light there. And it was one of those things where you flip the light in the morning, and if you were to put a camera on it, which we were always taking videos and that kind of thing, and it had the strobing effect in the video and I swear that kind of light just bothers your eyes. Whenever we worked in this corner, which the garage door was here, so again, we were kicked back because you can't put something like this up against a garage door. You can't put any storage up against a garage door because the way that a garage door operates, the reason we have roll-up doors in the new edition is they don't take up headspace. But the way a garage door works is actually, it was about here. So we had the garage door at this height all the way up to here, and it completely cut any ability to put anything tall. You can still see that we haven't painted that last bit where the garage door came out. It only came out a few months ago, actually. So almost 3 full years in that we worked in a garage with a garage door. Authentically garage bakers. We're still in a garage, but now this space doesn't have a garage door anymore. So refrigeration was really important to us in the beginning. This was actually the 3rd fridge that we picked up on auction. This one came in almost 2 years later. We had one 3-door fridge that came with the bakery. It had not had a Freon charge for a long time, so in the summertime it held like 60 degrees. It wasn't very useful. Useful enough to keep room temperature that's comfortable while the rest of the bakery is 120 degrees. So those of you bakers out there, that's what we did. We worked in 120 degrees and we used the fridge to just cool things down to more of a reasonable rate of growth. It's ridiculous. Where that wall is right now, there is another 12 feet of space, and that whole 12 feet was all that step. Useless, absolutely useless. The only thing we could really do with it is put fridges around the entire strip. So I spent a day, we used to have closets back there. If you go way back into our photos, you might find some photos of the garage, and there were literally closets. So we used the shelves of those closets originally as like our shelving. Now we have like treated wood, and then, you know, drainage type shelves where we can actually get things to air dry when they're stored. But back then we just had those built-in closets, one of which was a little tool shed in the corner. So there was a day in the summertime, a year in, where I took a Sawzall. I started to upgrade all my tools. Now I own enough tools to build a house, and they're going to come in handy very soon here. But I cut the wall of those closets, which was deeper in, and I left it kind of ugly, just open, exposed, and I just set the fridges there. The space was kind of getting uglier and uglier because the last thing I wanted to do was spend time on finishing touches. And that's where I really needed my dad. So he showed up for the first time in the fall of 2018. We were in this space, and shoot, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind a little bit. Rewinding the tape. 2 ovens. A really terrible deck oven that can bake 8 loaves an hour. The bottom deck of the 2 decks had a broken top element, so it could only heat from the stone. The top deck was fully functional. No such thing as steam injection. We had to spray it with water in order to introduce steam. It was porous, so the steam didn't trap, so we had to actually babysit the bake the whole time, reapplying steam throughout. We didn't actually know about the steam pan technique, which would have been a much better choice. Those of you with Rofco ovens in your home kitchens, steam pans are a really great choice. You can fill them with water. The water slowly evaporates and traps into the oven, which those Rofcos are actually pretty good at insulating. And then 20 minutes or so into your bake, or whenever is appropriate, you can remove the pan from the oven and finish your loaves that way. It would have been a better choice for us too, but we just didn't know about it back then. We were new. So we were spraying, and that oven baked like a wood-fired oven. I was over here, and the way that it worked is we would crank it up to the temperature of the sun, 550 degrees, and we would load bread in. I'd introduce steam, and then set a timer, not the oven timer. All the timers on that oven were busted long time before I got to it. So we had at the beginning all kinds of physical timers for everything. Timers for all the hand mixes. We had to keep track of so many more things because everything was being done by hand in small batches. But back to the oven, we had that going, and the left side of the oven baked so hot versus the right side. So once those loaves set, we had to shuffle them around so that they didn't burn. Throughout the course of that bake, the oven lost so much heat. It didn't have an actual digital temperature gauge on the side. In fact, both thermostats were broken, so you just turned on heat. That's it. Heat on. Heat moving upward. Heat continuing to move upward. We bought one of those like laser temperature guns at Home Depot, and we would open it up and just measure the temperature of the stone, measure the temperature of the walls. Again, go back into history, watch the feed. You can see that stuff in our feed. It was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, because we pulled loaves out 40 minutes later. The oven had dropped 150 degrees in temperature, and now we had to turn that heat back up and wait. So we had to wait a good 25 minutes before loading literally only another 8 loaves. We could bake them only in the top deck because the bottom deck had a busted top element, so it was useless for the artisan loaves. You can't bake a crust without ambient heat from the top radiating. That's how bread bakes. Old ovens that were designed as wood-fired ovens, they're all dome-shaped, and they're dome-shaped intentionally so that that heat coming off the fire, off the stone, actually wraps around and creates ambient heat that basically hugs a loaf of bread and allows it to expand upward. Pizza ovens are not as good in their design. Our deck oven that's in there right now is designed to do the same thing as the old wood-fired ovens, except perfectly stable. So those were nuts. I want to take you over to this station. Again, go to my feed. There wasn't a mixer here. There was a convection oven, just, 3-level typical restaurant convection oven. Except this one was atypical in the sense that it was probably at least 20 years old. And if you looked at the thing and you looked at the side panel of it, first of all, there was no side panel. You saw the wiring. That's how we got it. All the wiring was completely exposed. And this was one of the first things we hooked up. I told you about that electrician that came by and did his thing. Well, so he brought the power in and he hooked it to this oven, and he was so horrified that he said, "Look, John, I need to help you with this because you are going to kill somebody if this stays in this state." If you looked at the electrical panel, you saw the feed of the electrical coming in, and you saw the ends of the wires exposed, like you could touch the live power with your hand if you wanted to. And then the way that the terminal was set up, the wires were barely touching the terminal ending that were actually going into the oven. And so the thing actually regularly sparked. It was a fire hazard if there was ever a fire hazard. So the electrician actually completely bypassed that terminal and took the feed and basically safely hooked it up so that there was no fire hazard from sparking anymore. But that was not the end of the woes of that oven. That oven was so old you couldn't even buy parts for it. And again, it was one of those turn on and let it heat up to the heat of the sun. So we waited for it to heat up to, we couldn't set a temperature. It had a dial, but the dial was meaningless. It just kept heating because the thermostat in it was busted. Now, mind you, I was a new baker, so I didn't really understand oven mechanics like I do today. I didn't really know what the thermostat, how the thermostat worked. I couldn't really explain it the way I do now, but I'll explain it to those of you who might not know yet. The way thermostats in an oven work is basically you set the heat to what you want, and the thermostat measures the internal temperature in the oven. So it turns on the heating element, just turns it on. It's either on or off. Pretty simple. When that thermostat reads the temperature you want, the heating element kicks off and it coasts. When the temperature drops, the heating element kicks back on and it holds your temperature. That's how ovens work. Not when the temperature thermostat is broken. Then you turn it on and it just keeps heating. It never stops. So the way that we learned how to bake pastry while we were hand mixing and doing our thing and running around and managing 20 timers and figuring out how to deliver ourselves and figuring out how to deal with this oven that was not stable, that we had to manually spray, and dealing with our hot fridges and hand laminating pastry dough and hand mixing doughs. Our pastry bake worked as follows. We would put in 3 rows of pastry on sheet trays. We would turn it on. We had a manual thermometer that we stuck in the oven and we watched it. When the heat got to 375, we put in some pastries and we set a timer in a multi-timer. So we found some apps on our phones that allowed us to set like 20 timers at once, all labeled different things. And that's how we lived our life. We were ruled by these timers. Because we didn't have a sense of rhythm yet. There is something of a rhythm in the bakery, and as you get better and better as a baker, the timing is all up here. I swear it's uncanny. As you work those 20-hour days, you work those long shifts, and you build all the crazy paranoia that comes with monitoring so many things that, keep in mind, everything in baking, if it fails, it's done. You burn something, it's over. You just wasted all the last 30 hours of your life making something for it to burn all at the end. If you mess up at the mixing, you've just lost all that product. If you mess up in the middle, you lost the batch. It's really, really hard to recover batches. We're better now. You've seen me do it on video actually, because I like to make camera gaffes, but I'm able to adjust now because of that breadth of knowledge that we acquired over the course of those early days. Because everything was different in here. One day it was 120, then 2 months later it was 70, then 3 months later it was like 40 degrees here in the morning. And believe it or not, the ambient temperature of the space matters greatly. We didn't really understand all those effects, the cause and effects of all that, so we had to learn a lot. So anyway, the pastry bake. 375, you load in 3 trays, you set a multi-timer 6 minutes, and you pretend like you can actually get something reasonable done in 6 minutes. You rush and try to get whatever else done on the table. Timer goes off. Now I had to turn off the heat, rotate all the pastries because this thing didn't bake evenly either, especially with this method. And now I was letting it coast. So it had heated up over the 6 minutes, and now for 6 minutes it was coming back down to 375. All the while I'm watching that temperature gauge like a speedometer and trying to keep it in range manually. It's like a manual on a car. All of our equipment was like that. So yes, we had electricity, but even our electrical equipment ran like a medieval bakery would. And that's why I make the statement that I could have brought in a baker from the Middle Ages, and if I could just justify why these things were wired a little bit differently, all the methodology of even operating them was probably similar to the wood-fired ovens that they were used to, and certainly everything else we did was similar to that. So it's nutty. Don't look at that dough sheeter and think that we had stuff like that. When we made our pastry dough back then, it was literally with a rolling pin. When I was working in here at 3 in the morning and preparing butter for croissant dough, it was something like this. This actually went pretty well. This must have been softened before. But literally, that was what we were doing, and that will wake you up a house away, I promise you. So everything we did was super rudimentary, super old school, super rustic. When it came to actually laminating croissant dough, you'll see plenty in my feed on what I used to do. And you should see it because I'm kind of proud of what we ended up getting to.
It's just one of those things that
I had 2 weeks of live training before this whole bakery was in my hands. Jared had moved away. He's not the most communicative over the phone, so it wasn't like if I sent him a text message, he might reply like a day later sometimes. I was on my own 2 weeks later. I was getting yelled at by restaurants every day. It was trial by fire. I had to really quickly learn all these variables. So the way that I did croissants was literally rolling out butter, doing this all by hand, 115 degrees, nuts. The process slowly evolved. So Jared had this pasta roller. They kind of look like the dough sheeters do in the middle. It's 2 big rolling pins and a hand crank where you can bring the rolling pins together more and more, except they sit up and off the ground, so they're up here. And they're abrasive. When you roll things through them, they put on a lot of force. We didn't know how to control temperature. We didn't know how to balance the different. So now you can watch my croissant video. We might even be able to put in a link for you to the full start to finish sourdough croissant video. And you'll notice that we control temperature between the sheets of dough that we make and the butter that we make, and they're 2 different temperatures. It's absolutely critical. In the beginning, we didn't know any of that. So we were actually going cold with the butter and doing our best to try to cool down dough, which was impossible to cool down when you have a 60-degree fridge and 120-degree space. And that was exactly the opposite of what it needed to be. The butter needed to be pliable and the dough needed to be cold to keep the butter in that perfect range as you rolled it up, rolled it out, and heated it up. It took me a year of doing lamination by hand basically over 40 hours a week. And if you think that the only thing I could do is lamination, that's absolutely wrong. I did every single thing that there is to do to run a business, both in and out, delivery, market. 40 hours a week was just the segment that I had to spend on croissant work. Our weeks were pushing over 100 hours every single week. I was not sleeping. I'm not exaggerating. If I got 2 or 3 hours a night, that's all. So now I want to fast forward to the winter of 2018. We had added our third market in January of 2018. It actually coincided with our breakup with that 7-day-a-week sandwich shop. That was taking up so much of our bandwidth that we had maxed out. That was it. 2 markets and this restaurant were keeping us busy, except we still weren't able to make enough money to cover the bills. We were still losing money. And we started to do the math and realized that this restaurant account was financially killing us because we were working like 5 or 6 hours dedicated every day on their bake, plus an hour round trip of delivery. And the entire week was worth maybe $800. So do the math there. 7 days a week, roughly 7 hours of dedicated production by a single person every single day. You have to pay for ingredients. You are selling at bottom of the barrel wholesale prices because that was the deal that was negotiated before your time. And these people, I respect them for their business savvy. They know how to get a good deal for themselves. They know how to drive a price down. That's what their business experience was. They had all the negotiation. They were experienced restaurateurs, and I was a brand new baker. So I was getting beat up a little bit. And I don't think that they would shy away from saying that they were doing a little bit of beating up back at that time. I regret that I waited 8 months to change that relationship, because in that time my marriage was actually suffering as a result. When my wife noticed that I was sacrificing myself and getting nothing in return, she started questioning, who is this man that I'm married? Why is this man doing this to himself? He is worth more. But I didn't really recognize that at that time. I felt like a sense that I needed to somehow abuse myself because I needed to prove something. I needed to prove that I was really a baker and I could do this. I needed to prove to the world that yes, I could do restaurant accounts. I got this. But it wasn't right for the business. So we added a third market. January of 2018, we added the Uptown Farmers Market. And the first week, our first Saturday, beat the entire week of sales for that restaurant account in one day. And they also had a midweek market on Wednesday mornings that we joined. So it was a no-brainer. It was a great decision. Now we had 3 markets though, and so Saturday was ramping up. So that's when I bought some extra fridges and filled the space. We went through that summer. I was still all on my own. We were just adding all kinds of crap here. I bought this mixer that January. I thought, wow, I got a mixer. Awesome. Except this mixer can do no more than like 15 loaves of bread in it. And we were making far more than that every day. And it was faster to do it by hand. So honestly, I was getting yelled at for this $1,000 that I lost on this mixer because it was getting no use and just sitting around. We did like stir eggs and stuff in it, but that did not seem like a great use of $1,000 at that time. Now we actually get quite a bit of use out of it. We make all kinds of fillings and things, and it has more than paid off itself. But the funny thing is our second most expensive mixer, this one we bought in the summer of 2018, our first mixer, about 13 months after hand mixing. We're already supporting 3 farmers markets on Saturday, doing sourdough croissants year round, doing all the stuff that you basically see us making today. We were already making to some form or another. Of course, we've changed all the recipes over time, but by that point we had already started our relationship with Hayden, which was February of 2018, huge move, changed all of our formulas to whole grain at that time. I started to build a little bit more confidence as a baker. We had a great team around us that I still love to this day. Unfortunately, we had kind of a devastating falling out in that fall. This type of business brings a lot of stress with it, and we definitely increased the stress load on everybody here as things kept getting busier and busier and busier, and we started to get more and more crammed in these original 500 square feet. Now, February of 2018, we're going about our business, we got our 2 ovens going, and all of a sudden our big deck oven breaks. I can't even describe the level of stress, because by that point I had actually gotten, my business history is a little complicated. I got a divorce in 2015, sorry. 2016, I was still running my old company as an owner with my ex-wife. And it was starting to get to be too much to work with my ex on business. I was starting to have these difficult conversations of, well, okay, I go home to Amanda and we have this great life outside of work, but then actually I'm still spending more time every day with my ex-wife at work. And we had truly irreconcilable differences. What drove us apart, I mean, we were together since we were 15 years old. We got married at 19. We lived really fast. We had our 2 girls pretty young. By the time I was 25, both of them were born. And we grew up in different ways. And it was painful. But at some point we realized that we were the furthest from compatible, and that we were facing a long life of just unhappiness, which translates to the girls too. I'm not a big believer in divorce, to be honest. No one in my family has gotten a divorce. Everybody's toughed it out. It was a really difficult move. But a year afterwards of that divorce, I was still in business. And the only way to figure things out was we actually ended up literally giving our company's ownership away in return for a royalty deal. And I went to work as the company's president for the new owner. That's what I was doing when I bought Proof. 6 months into my relationship with Proof, about a year and a half after I gave up ownership of my business, as I progressively saw that something wasn't right, the new owners were slowly but surely stripping me of my responsibility. And that's not who I am. I love working hard. So they're trying to act all nice to me, like, hey, you got a lot on your plate. Let us take this off your hands so that you can focus on this or that. I didn't take well to that because it was my baby. I had started this thing from the ground. It was worth nothing. That business was me as somebody in my mid-20s walking into a corporation unannounced and getting a 6-figure contract for myself for the business. Nervously shaking in sales meetings because I was intimidated by talking to these executives, offering really kind of a fringe service that they benefited from, but was not the highest on their priority list. It's not like bread where we got to eat. This is more of an essential. That business would be shut down during a pandemic, unlike this one. You just don't need that type of analysis going on during a pandemic. I'm sure that those grocery stores were not getting mystery shopped during that time. Anyhow, 7 months into taking over Proof, I get an unceremonious call from my now boss saying that I am effective immediately fired from the company that I started. I had not come to terms with giving that up yet. Part of what brought me to Proof was that I saw that relationship going downhill, and it terrified me because that's all I had. And for me, somebody who traded that more formal route towards a successful career, the MBA, the corporate job, the internship. I had always done my own thing. I had taught tennis, started my own tennis business. I had then started this video mystery shopping business. It was growing. It was promising. We had started building software that other mystery shopping companies were applying, and they were converting from just written reports to video, and I was pioneering this technology. So then I'm fired, and proof is now my only source of income. Meanwhile, we're having this great conflict with this restaurant. We're actually more miserable than we've ever been in our life because we haven't slept in 8 months. We're fighting all the time. I mean, it's like me in here 16 hours and then staying up much of those other 8 hours, literally screaming back and forth with Amanda. Like, we had kind of a comfortable life. She was working for an airline in the corporate office. We could fly anywhere in the world that we wanted to standby for free. If we wanted to go internationally, we just paid taxes. If we wanted to go domestically, we hopped on a flight and we were anywhere we wanted to be. I was making a good 6-figure income from my old business. When I gave up ownership, I had to cut that back a little bit, but it was still a healthy salary that I was making for the easiest work that I ever had to do. Because like I said, I was getting stripped of responsibility month in, month out. And so outside of this, we were supporting ourselves. Amanda owned a condo in Tempe. We were renting this place. We had a bakery. All of a sudden, we're buying this place. We're having this crazy conflict where we must lose our biggest account. Otherwise, we're going to drive ourselves literally into the grave with stress. Because this restaurant literally expected that every single ciabatta roll was perfectly identical. I struggle to make perfectly identical ciabatta rolls today. I really do. I'm actually still working on it. It's insanely difficult, especially sourdough, especially hand mix, especially hand stretched, no machinery. The ciabatta rolls that you eat in your restaurants are industrially produced. They are cut by massive machines. The dough formulation is not designed to be open and airy. It's actually quite dense and heavy because you can't make that wet of a dough uniform. It doesn't want to be uniform. Nothing about it wants to be uniform. Just search ciabatta. You'll see all kinds of crazy freeform shapes. This is the bread that you kind of like slap some wet dough around and see what happens. And you enjoy a sandwich on it. It's rustic. It's meant to be rustic. And everything about our bakery screamed rustic. So now we get to our first winter. I'm unceremoniously fired from the company that I started from zero. I just lost $60,000 a year of income. I'm losing that one account that was carrying us forward. We're starting a brand new farmer's market. We get a month in, and our pizza oven breaks. I didn't know a service company. I start Google searching. We're new. We didn't come into this working at a restaurant, getting necessary contacts. You know, when you're in the industry, it's a tight-knit family all around the city. That's why it's so absolutely devastating and unforgivable what's happening to our restaurants around the country right now. So many Americans work in the food industry. They've been disproportionately affected by this pandemic, and frankly, they have received little to no help. However, they are the most resilient type of humans out there, and even when we see scary statistics of 85% of restaurants shutting down after this experience that we're all going through, I believe that to be true, but I believe that all those people are going to be creative and come back stronger. At least some of them will. I do believe that we will lose some people, though, in this mix that we're offering the world something really incredible. Anyway, I didn't get that experience, that whole community, all the relationships that come with it. I was learning that all by fire. So our oven breaks, and I call a Google number. Some of you might relate to this, that working with service contractors is a difficult relationship. They're working on something technical. You have something that you desperately need that's broken, and they're the only ones that can help you. They're holding all the cards. If you don't know the actual equipment, then they tell you what's wrong and you just trust them. That's where I was at. This guy comes over and he opens up the side of the oven, which, by the way, was decades old. It had been in many facilities before. It had been serviced by many self-starting restaurateurs and by Jared. And I mean, we can get a laugh out of this now. It certainly was not funny at the time, but the side where all the electrical wiring was, it's just like wires everywhere. Just all kinds of wires have been added. You could not tell how this thing was wired together. You could not. So this man spent a lot of time on it, said, I need to go back and see if I can find some parts. He charged us because he had spent time, and they don't come out for free. A huge service charge, in the hundreds of dollars. Mind you, we didn't have this kind of money sitting around. And then he charged us $100 an hour for his labor. We have never had a service person out for under $1,000. We got about $1,000 bill and did not have a fixed oven. And then we got a call from the company saying, we're very sorry, but we can't order parts for your oven. However, it just so happens that we have a used equipment warehouse and we have some pizza ovens, so we'll sell you one. We have one on the floor for $6,000. I literally saw the end of my life financially right there. I had just lost my business. I was still reeling from that. And now I had no way of baking bread for market. So for 2 weeks, we were only making pastry and what we can make in our convection oven. So at that time, we didn't have the following that we do today. We had a nice following. We had some really loyal customers, the most loyal. None of our products looked the same every week. They were the most rustic of rustic of rustic. Sometimes they were good, and sometimes they were, as my dad says, shit totalny in his Polish accent. We make fun of him for that because anything he doesn't like, he says, shit totalny. But that was the truth. I mean, sometimes our sourdough croissants came out as total bricks. They were never that beautiful honeycomb. It would take another 6 or 7 months. Yet people loved what we were making because we were actually making it authentically with good ingredients, with old methods. It smelled better. It tasted better than the crap out there, even though any baker worth anything would say that our stuff was crap. But our stuff was so much better than the typical stuff out there. And that was the foundation of this beautiful rustic bakery that has organically grown, that has stemmed from people just learning how to bake the old-fashioned way, literally putting their hands in dough and learning day by day what's going on. Our oven goes down, and we decided to put up a GoFundMe. We didn't have a web presence, really. We didn't send emails all the time. We didn't have people following along to every word that we were saying. We're so fortunate and just humbled to have today. But yet, within a weekend, we raised $3,000. There's no way we're buying the same type of oven that we had. We knew that there was something here. We knew that if we could just push through this difficult moment, that something good maybe would happen of this. Maybe it was a new beginning. The oven that we needed a steam injected oven. The one that we probably would have been recommended to by most bakers was a European import that cost about $30,000. But we found an American similar oven. It's almost like a budget company because they try to really cut the cost. And their whole pitch, they're called ABS. We have a lot of equipment from them. I do recommend them, really, very much so. Because they make good stuff with good bones that's easy to service. But even still, $20,000 for our 4-deck steam injected oven. First piece of equipment that we bought that was super expensive. We didn't even own a mixer yet, nothing. There's no way, after I had just lost my business, Amanda was still full-time at the airline, keeping us afloat, literally paying every dollar that she earned a little extra to pay our staff, to keep this thing afloat. She literally floating us on her own at that point because the bakery was barely making enough to just pay the employees to pay for flour. It was bad. So we raised something like $3,500 on GoFundMe. You can probably still find the old campaign in about a weekend. What's coming up now is going to cost a lot more than that, and I'm going to get to that. But we did that, and it was nowhere near the $20,000 that we needed. So that's when Amanda's dad came in, and he loaned us the rest. He had the rest, and he gave us a loan. You don't even know how against I am taking a retired man's money. There's something so wrong in my bones to take somebody's money who is on a fixed income. I felt such a responsibility to pay him back. So then we had to decide to sell Amanda's condo. She had bought it in 2011. She bought it when the market was down. She got a really good deal. She bought it as a foreclosure. And we made a pretty penny back. We immediately took 1/5 of our return and paid her dad back for that oven. Then we took another 1/5 of our return and dealt with a big problem that we had, that this oven took the amount of power that the entire house had available. If you only have 200 amps of power and your oven requires 200 amps of power, then obviously you have no more available power. And we live here, we have bathrooms, we, believe it or not, still have to cook for ourselves, and we have a kitchen, we have laundry, and all the things that normally we have. So we had to upgrade this. This is our electrical panel. This is now a 400 amp panel that's actually ready to accept solar one day. It has this other half that's solar ready. We wanted to do, if we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it so that we could benefit ourselves in the future. Except that's not enough, just throwing a box. That'd be nice. This big fat cable has one single purpose, because the other 200 amps that were already here run through the wall all throughout the house, and a tiny portion of it goes to the garage. But in this big fat cable is all the power that just feeds one oven. One oven. And this 200 amps right now, which my dad in his Polish English misspelled as furnace, this is all for that one oven. Now, this is really relevant to this discussion actually. Notice the approvals by our power company and how we did this all above ground. We got the necessary approvals. We did this all with permission. We did this all with city approval. We did not hold anything back. We added all that power for something. In our case, it was an oven. Some people add power for their pools or whatever it is that they do. It's the same thing, in my opinion. We're both drawing more energy. I'm doing something productive for my community. They're just jumping in a pool for themselves. Yet, actually, there's something against putting an oven in the minds of people, which has gotten us in trouble now. But there's nothing wrong with investing in a pool. Will all of you stop for a moment and ask yourselves why we live in this kind of world where a man can't make a living from his own home? Why is it that I can't invest in an oven if I have the resources for it, but I can invest in a pretty pool? Does it bother you that I have an oven that makes no noise, that puts off no emissions, it's electric? Does it bother you that it's in my house? Does it really bother you that much that it's in my walls? It bothers people right now. It bothers people enough that they've complained about it. That is forcing us to move everything from here in just 4 months. But I'm getting ahead of myself because there's still a lot more to this story. We only had the ability to use a half of it. So the way that we had wired it is we wired this deck and we wired this deck. And this one and this one were idle for the first 6 months. Now subtract our convection oven, and we actually had less baking capacity than we had with our old equipment. So we had to actually go down before we went back up. And we had just spent a fortune, an absolute fortune. The electrical upgrade was through a contractor. It had to be city approved. Remember, we had that landing. And that oven weighs a literal ton. We didn't have any way of lifting it, even a few inches. So it sat right where all of this is. And it took up to here in space. Then we add our big cooling rack right here. We were literally getting squeezed from all sides, just squeezed. There we had more equipment than we ever had in our life before. We had that giant oven. We had the 120 degrees. We still had a skeleton crew. I was still doing all the lamination. We didn't own a dough sheeter, so I was doing it. The way that we were laminating pastry before, I was the only one who could do it because it would take me 6 months to train somebody with the way that we did it. And that clearly is not a good use of time. So I was in it. I was doing it. 120 degrees, 16-hour days. It's like, Dad, I need you. I need to get the oven out of there. That oven is literally baking us alive. It's destroying all of our dough. It's causing an environment that is going to kill somebody one day at 120 degrees. I'm exaggerating because, frankly, if you want to be a baker, you kind of got to roll up your sleeves and be ready to be in the heat. That's just part of the trade. But your dough production area cannot be 120 degrees if you want to be a sourdough baker. It cannot. One of the reasons why there's not more sourdough bakers out there is because many dough production areas venture over 100 degrees. Many bakeries don't offer their employees enough cooling, and yeast functions fine at that temperature, but you can't control sourdough at that temperature effectively. So, what did we do? This was our backyard. There was an air conditioner right here. That was the main air conditioner for this side of the house. There was an exterior wall that led to our house. There was an exterior wall here that led to our garage. Our driveway ended right here. You can see this line. This was our driveway. And so what we had to do is, so this curvature here, this was a sidewalk in our old backyard. So you used to open up a gate. So this is so weird. It's hard to even conceive that this is how things were, because now I'm so used to these buildings. But there was a gate here, like a backyard gate, and you would open the gate and you would go around this bend. The concrete ended right here. You see this line? And so that's all the concrete that we had. So what we did was we poured this extra concrete and squared it up. Of course, we applied for permits with the city of Mesa. We got all the permits we needed for the construction. And then my dad proceeded to build this building from scratch. The only contractor that came in here was the concrete guy. We had a cement truck. They poured the concrete. One dude smoothed it all out in one day. We let that all cure. And then my dad got after the framing. Meanwhile, me and my crew were one exterior wall away, just working away at the bakery, which was already picking up steam It was doing well. This was now transitioning into the winter of 19. Now we added our fourth market. We had our rhythm. We started to actually get into profitability January of 2019. We had to take out some short-term loans to pay for all the construction. But he got this building done by March of 2019. The last piece after inspection, so we cut this wall. My crew the people that were here during that time won't forget, because we're just working and all of a sudden somebody bangs a hole in the wall. And that was about where we ended it that day. We shut down for the weekend. We plasticed everything so that the debris wouldn't get anywhere. And we finished cutting the rest of the wall and opening this up. But there was still that landing. If you go back into my Instagram feed, March of 2019, you will see a picture of an older man, my dad, with a car jack lifting that giant oven over that ledge, doing all kinds of crazy maneuvering with me to bring it out into this room. The last thing we did on that trip, we applied on that permit application, new gas service. This house did not have gas. So we added new gas service from the street, brought it in, and my last day with my dad, the day before he flew home, we hadn't put a single gas line in this place yet. We had just stubbed it out and gotten it approved by the city inside the bakery, and we spent 20 hours running a gas line. You see that black pipe that runs around, it turns here, it turns around here, and it runs this whole stretch. There's no oven for the gas. We just knew that the following winter we would be growing enough that it would merit a rack oven. We had no idea how we'd pay for it because it came with a higher price tag than this one did, but we knew that we would need it. So we put in the gas line just in case my dad couldn't come back the next year, but we tentatively agreed that we would have one more winter of construction and that would bring the bakery to completion. We invited my dad back out last winter. This time he arrived in November, and he and my mom were staying until February. Everything that I'm standing in right now used to just be the outside of the house. The driveway ended right here, and then this was like the fence, and we had poured this the year prior up to this line, and then over here was gravel. In fact, under that gravel is the residue of all that sink drainage. So we did what we needed to do with it. Now it's covered by cement and we're all good. But the first thing we did was design our packaging and distribution room. So the whole idea here, and we haven't even gotten to completion, we still have a few things that we wanted to do, like part of this wall. This is still the exterior wall from the first edition that we did. And our intention was to remove this facade off this wall. I think it's just fascia, you can call this fascia. We're gonna remove that and have a pass-through cooling rack here. We're also going to cut like a 4-foot hole over there so that we could take stuff from the pastry oven and wheel it straight in here, combining effectively these two spaces and making them more functional. So this was designed to bring our whole bakery to completion, and it was really all designed in part to satisfy our community as well, because as we were growing, we had our old truck that had broken down in our yard, storing all of this, pallets of flour. We had nowhere to put it. You can't put it in there, you can't put it in the oven room, it's not enough space. And we've had this situation for a little while now. We started buying flour by the pallet in the summer of 18. So we were storing it on the back of a truck. That was part of what was getting us in hot water with our neighbor, because he didn't like that that truck was just sitting there. We designed this space so that there would be space for the flour, and our main delivery truck was out here. On Fridays, we had to come all the way up here and be exposed in front of the street and load our stuff. That's the only time we're out here. It wasn't a big deal, but it was more than I like. So I designed this new addition for the future. I designed it so that we could pull the truck all the way back. We could put a gate in front of it, and now it was behind a gate. And the best part was I didn't have to move it in order to load it all the way up. So I didn't have to move it from this space until I was ready to pull it out and leave the property. And the way that I accomplished that was by putting in another garage door on this side. So this garage door was placed 30 feet back so that we could take bread and load it from here and up and onto the truck. It was elegant and designed with my neighbors in mind, designed so that truly the impact to our neighborhood was no more than an RV, because our truck is about the size of an RV. And so again, sort of in my showing you a little bit of the underlying emotion here, why is it okay for my neighbors all up and down the street to have RVs parked in plain view, but because my truck is shaped a little bit differently and has a different function overall, that gets me in such hot water that I'm going to have to uproot this whole place over 4 months, risking everything that we've worked this hard for? Why? And also, if I've done everything to get it behind a fence to limit the visibility, where you have to be standing directly in front of my driveway to even see that such a thing exists. You can't hear it. Literally, it pulls out once a week with product. So we built this whole thing. My dad did all of this. You can see that this is a 14-foot tall room. It's gorgeous in here. And we built this giant door so that also if we got into more hot water than we expected, worst case scenario, we could actually pull the whole truck back here. And later on in the future of this facility, this will be an RV garage for some person that cares to have an RV if we don't live here. So we designed it with the house in mind, but also with the bakery in mind, serving both needs. We also figured that when we get flour delivery, we could easily just roll the door up, bring it in, let the truck go out and buy. 5 minutes in, 5 minutes out. In fact, I think a flour delivery is coming later today. So this was this past winter. We weren't even finished, and then the pandemic hit. My dad had run out of time. Actually, he got sick for about a week in February, and he lost a critical week that he needed to finish the project. So he didn't finish the electrical. We weren't using the space at all. Then all of a sudden the pandemic hit and we had to pivot the whole business 180 degrees. We went from doing 95% of our business in live market sales on Saturday mornings to most of those live market sales washing up from 1 week to the next. The only way that we survived that time was we rallied all of our customers to order in advance and pick up their orders so they could just go to the market, grab their bag and leave, because there was so much fear about being out in public. For us, that meant that we went from handling maybe 30 pre-orders on a Friday night here, which is no big deal, 30 orders for the type of production we do, to having to package on the busiest week 500 orders here before they ever left to market. We had never done something like that before. We had always taken bulk product, put it on bulk transit devices like those shelves that you might have seen in our other videos that house bread, and then we would set it all up at market and package to order. Now, all of a sudden, all of that had to change. Everything had to be pre-packaged. Everything had to be in plastic, which we hardly were packaging any more than we had to. and people loved us for it. They loved that we were being eco-conscious in that way and not just wasting plastic on everything that didn't need it. All of a sudden it became a safety thing. So we had to package everything here, 500 plus orders. It was insane. It took an army in here on Friday nights during the pandemic to get this all ready. Whereas prior to the pandemic, we only had 3 or 4 people in here working at that time, wrapping up Friday night bakes. So that was difficult. The project, we had to cut some corners too. We hadn't gotten our final inspection, and it was either continue operating, continue providing stable work, use this building that didn't have power yet, but during the day at least we could use the space. That was the only thing missing. And so I was working on the electrical myself. I put in all of this electrical. You can kind of see how it goes up and around. I wired each of the lights, wired the outlets. I wired my first 3-way electrical switch, learned how to do that. Then brought it out to this side, wired the exterior light, wired this room. And so I got a letter from the city this summer saying, we noticed that your truck is still parked there, and it's a commercial truck, and you're not allowed to have that kind of commercial truck parked on property. It was a hard decision for me because I had done all this specific construction to accommodate the truck well, and I didn't agree with this problem. I thought it was BS because it's not impacting anybody. But I decided to rent a parking spot at a nearby storage unit where we now keep the truck. We made a sacrifice, and we actually sacrificed our Wednesday night market, which brought us good revenue. Because by sacrificing Wednesday night, we were able to keep the truck out at the parking lot all but once a week. So now all we needed it for was to take stuff to market on Saturdays. And so we pull the truck in on Friday night, we load it, and we immediately leave with it. So now that's completely okay. There's actually nothing wrong with that. So when I finished that mitigation, I wrote the city, who we had an open case with, and said, look, I have now met all the demands. You can't tell that anything's happening here. You can't tell that a bakery is here at all. We just want to work peacefully and be left alone. We're licensed through the cottage laws. We have insurance. We do all the things we need to do. We pay good wages. The people who work here are super happy. You can't actually physically prove that anybody's here unless you step inside my facility. So why do you care? Why does it matter to you what's happening inside my private residence if I'm not impacting the community at all, other than providing jobs and providing great bread? Does it really matter that I'm broadcasting beautiful smells of fresh baked bread throughout my street? Because that's literally our only impact right now, our only impact. We don't bring pests, we don't bring noise, we don't bring ruckus. We bring really good people here, really good people that are just trying to support themselves and their families, people that are like our family because they've been here so long and built up so much trust. Most of our neighbors, the current situation that we're dealing with, if you go through our Instagram feed, you'll see a box that our neighbor 2 doors down made us in comfort because we're getting kicked out of here. And the box was addressed to John, Amanda, and the workers, not just John and Amanda, because most of the people around here appreciate what we bring to our street. In the pandemic, we never struggled making bread. In the height of the crisis, when the global food supply chain momentarily was breaking and was unreliable, I sent a text message to my local mill and I upped my order of flour, and because I'm one of their biggest accounts, they accommodated me. And because they buy flour or they buy wheat from locally sourced growing operations, there was no problem. The flour didn't have to come here from far away. The wheat's still in the ground. It's not like it, just because a pandemic hit, that all of a sudden, wheat didn't grow. So we didn't have any supply chain issues on the small scale. And I would think that moving forward in this increasingly uncertain world, that if you have a neighbor that can create no real negative impact to your street and to your immediate community, but can on the drop of a dime feed thousands, why would you want to eliminate that? Why would you want to eliminate that sense of community safety that comes from that good source of food? Why would you want to eliminate all the good jobs that are being created when everybody else is going out of business right now? I can't tell you, we doubled our staff in the pandemic. We took people that were furloughed, we took people that were laid off, we took people that still are furloughed and still are laid off, and they're still working here, and they've made good full-time wages ever since that day. Just 40 days ago, the vice mayor of the city of Mesa came over here the day after I had a conversation with the mayor of the city of Mesa, expressing huge support for our community business, which is pretty well known in the city and beyond. They understood our story, they understood the challenges with it, they understood it was the middle of a pandemic, and we were offered assurances that we could take our time, but that eventually we'd have to move. We're talking about timeframes of 18 months. We were told that we wouldn't be punished during the pandemic especially. Just last Friday, out of nowhere, the same individual showed back up and handed me a demand notice saying that we need to move everything we have in here within 4 months. It took 3 years of every ounce of energy, every penny that I have to make this space what it is today and to create the stability that we have today. The level of despair that I felt in that moment, especially when you take it along with this big personal problem that we have with our daughter's health, was like nothing else that I faced, because all of a sudden I felt like I might not be able to recover this one. We've overcome what are seemingly insurmountable challenges, and yet this one, moving an entire bakery operation in 4 months that's so precisely fine-tuned for what we do, in the middle of our busiest season, when we don't have a building, we don't have a thing, we just spent all of the earnings of the last 3 years that we've made above and beyond what we need to pay our employees and pay our bills on this infrastructure, on making it possible to be here comfortably. And we were really hoping for at least another year to be able to recoup our expenses. We did everything we could to make sure that we were well loved by the people around here. One neighbor, one persistently complaining neighbor, has been able to manage to convince the city to upheave this entire business over a city ordinance related to non-resident employees in this zoning district. I didn't even know about this ordinance until a year and a half in. And then I proceeded to make sure that from the street level, you can't even tell that there's somebody back here working. You can't tell that anything's happening. I made sure we were no disturbance. For some reason, that wasn't good enough. We face a financial challenge right now that will bankrupt us if we don't have help. There is hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment in this space, some of which I'll never recoup. I'm not going to be able to change the fact that we put in these walk-in coolers. I'm not going to be able to tear down buildings. Sure, I'll get more personal space. We'll have to figure out what to do with that later on. But we didn't want to move. We were stable here. We're serving our community here, serving our employees here. Most importantly, we're serving our family here, including a child that truly has some extenuating circumstances, the likes of which are not common. My daughter has a rare disease that only 1 out of every 50,000 people on earth have. There are exactly 2 specialists in the whole country that can treat her, and we haven't even seen them yet because we just finally got a diagnosis the same week that we were asked to leave here in 4 months. So last Wednesday, I get a diagnosis for my daughter of Friedreich's ataxia. It is a condition that is going to rip away progressively and painfully slowly her ability to walk on her own, her ability to stay coordinated. It's going to impact her speech her whole life. It's going to impact her cardiac systems. It does shorten lifespan. It does require constant care. We don't know what that landscape looks like yet. We just discovered that she might have this 6 months ago, and through a pandemic, we have been desperately trying to figure out what it is that she has, confirming through genetic diagnosis. We had insurance battles over the last 6 months. We've been bounced around from different levels of doctors, from primary all the way to our Phoenix Children's Hospital here, to the top level neurologist in the city. We finally got genetic confirmation last week, and it was severe. This condition typically shows itself a little bit later. The typical child starts to see symptoms from being absolutely normal, everything normal in their lives, like any other kid. They start to see certain symptoms, typically average age like 15. We started noticing that there was something wrong when Kira was 4 years old. And that genetic test that we got last week showed that she has one of the most severe cases of this that you can have. So our next step is actually to see a doctor in California. Just as we were processing all this news, we get a random visit from the city that says this entire business needs to be out of here by mid-January. Otherwise, you're going to start getting fines of $150 a day retroactive for as long as you've had non-resident employees. That alone would bankrupt us. So the situation is really, really severe on many levels, both personal and business. When I thought about moving from this place, Amanda and I have been thinking about that for the whole 3 years. Don't think for 1 second that we thought that we would be here forever. We just thought that we would be here long enough to buy a building so that we could carry on this legacy of owning our own place, of keeping stability, because once you rent, the whole circumstance changes. Rents in Phoenix have been going up over the last few years. Properties have been consolidated. Many of the commercial properties out there are owned by big-time property developers that have dozens and dozens of properties in their portfolio. Amanda and I had a fundamental problem with getting into that type of relationship because it seemed contradictory to the type of relationship that we have formed up until now. When you sign a commercial lease with a big-time property developer, when you accept hundreds of thousands of dollars of build-out help up front, that gets tacked onto your rent. And what ends up changing is that there is this giant financial pressure to pay that bill, which becomes your biggest bill. Now, we have bills inching closer and closer to $10,000 a month on flour. Imagine if on top of that you have a bill that big for your rent. What's going to change? Will you buy that expensive whole grain locally derived wheat anymore? Or will you have to go for the cheap 40-cent a pound flour that's white from the store that has almost no nutritional value for your customer because otherwise you can't keep the lights on? We saw, until something sort of miraculous happened, this timeline as the most unreasonable thing that we have faced against our business goals. Because we sat at our dining table with the city officials and said, look, what has made this place special is that we have gone back to quality. Quality costs money. Quality takes time. Quality takes precision. This space right here is precisely controlled. You can see that Even when it's 120 degrees out, this room stays at 75 degrees. You go into a new space that's bigger, that might be more open, I have to create that same dynamic again, and that dynamic did not come for free. Anywhere I go, I need walk-ins. I have to build those. Anywhere I go, I need huge amounts of power, huge amounts of gas. Then I need to build out retail. The building itself, if we are faced with a giant overhead, that means we have to be able to monetize the building, meaning we need a storefront. But then again, our entire business is a distribution business. So are we to go into a building and trade out everything that we make money with now that keeps the lights on? Absolutely not. So our building requirements are kind of vast. You need the ability to distribute, and you need the ability to do retail all in one, while housing a bakery that's growing. So again, anytime that you leap to the next level, that's exactly what it is. It's a leap. It's never like this. It's never like you make some bread, you make some profit, and all of a sudden you can afford the next level of your business. That's not how it works. Maybe if you guys were paying me $20 a loaf, that would be a reality. But the truth is that our margins are not as big as you might think. Even though you can buy a loaf of bread at the store for $3, that loaf is utter garbage, frankly. And once you start putting good stuff made by good people the old-fashioned way, $7 is a really affordable loaf of bread. I kid you not. We do not take a huge chunk of that $7 and then say, oh, let's grow the business. We have to save and save and save. And we have saved and put everything that's here. We've tried to stay out of debt. We carry a small amount of debt for our business because we've tried to do things the right way, the organic, slow way.